Well, hello. As promised, I'm coming back for another show. And as I explained the last time, I am not going to be doing any comic book reviews. And instead, I'm going to be focusing on stuff that I like throughout the ages. I've been doing a lot of research lately, mostly for pleasure, on several instances of the history of American comic books. And one of the things that fascinates me a lot is the Marvel used to be more creator friendly in the 1980s than DC ever was. DC is famous for having their Vertigo imprint, which started in 1993. And although it started to publish their more offbeat titles, it quickly morphed into a haven for a create your own series. But although at the time Marvel did not have such a series, Epic was alive back then. They closed in 1995. Um, but then they were just another imprint of whatever comics were available. They failed to capitalize on the 1992 bubble when a lot of the superhero universes started. But before that, in the 1980s, Marvel launched Epic Comics. Now, Epic was everybody knew that it was Marvel, and while a lot of people normally would not work for Marvel, here they found a place where they could publish their comics, publish their stories as they saw fit without any sort of editorial interference. And best of all, they could keep the rights to their own stories. They could take their properties elsewhere, and eventually many of them did. So much that several of their stories have been available as trade paperback reprints from other publishers, even today. Now, Epic started because Jim Shooter always wanted to make comics a little better. Shooter became the editor in chief of Marvel Comics in 1978, and he kind of cleaned house. Some people call his style dictatorial, perhaps, but you can't argue with the results. It worked. Marvel became a very interesting publisher during the early 1980s, both with their regular line and with their epic comics, which started basically in 1980 when Jim Shooter and Rick Marshall, who at the time was an editor at Marvel, launched Epic Illustrated, a magazine that was sort of their answer to heavy metal. A very good, sleek magazine, a large size that was started just so a lot of independent creators could showcase their work, and that also brought many European comics to the American shores. Many of the series that began at heavy metal had already been published in France in their own version called Metal Hurlant. Now, Epic Illustrated was sort of heavy metal light. The higher ups at Marvel didn't like it, and it's understandable. There was a lot of sex and violence, and even though they had the direct market as a sort of a place where they could retreat to publish those kinds of stories, um, they did not want to risk the wrath of any sort of censorship. They were already a big company, and they want to make sure that there was a way that they could still stay clean, even though many of the epic illustrated stories broke barriers. And but because they had epic, they had now an entry point where uh, writers and artists could showcase could make Marvel publish their own comics. At the time, the direct market had had begun to grow in size, Marvel and DC had already started to produce comics specifically for the specialty stores, and a lot of small publishers entered the marketplace during that time. We're talking about Eclipse and the short-lived Capital Comics and Pacific Comics, and later First Comics. And by publishing the Epic series, Marvel had a foothold to get some of those writers and artists that would usually not to want to work on those same on their own corporate-owned properties. So the story of Epic ultimately starts because three creators that had history with Marvel approached Jim Shooter wanting to do a series that Marvel would publish, but that they would own the rights. They were Jim Starlin, Frank Miller, and Walt Simonson. And out of all those three creators, only one actually launched a series in Epic. It, in fact, became the first Epic title. I'm talking about Dreddstar. Now, Dreddstar, here it is. This is the Slave Labor Graphics edition. Slave Labor published a series of black and white trade paperbacks, and they're not the most accurate reproductions of the original stories. The first volume, Metamorphosis Odyssey, introduces a series that began still in Epic Illustrated, where Jim Starlin basically did painted art. It's a space opera that at the now there's a thing about Starlin. He has a tendency to repeat himself, and that's why every time he has to come back to Marvel when he needs money, he will work on Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock and bring back Thanos. Uh, you will find some of those themes in Dreddstar, but here on the Metamorphosis Odyssey is sort of exploring new ground. And the story is different. There, the fate of the universe is really at stake. The way he tells the story, and the painted artwork, while it does not translate well to black and white, can still be seen. This is a chapter of the Metamorphosis Odyssey, introducing one of the main characters of the series, Wispar. She was sort of a fairy, and her father was based on Al Milgrom. You can see him here. And it was only on the fifth chapter that Starlin introduced what would become eventually his main character, Dreddstar. It is on chapter 5, Vanth. This is where the wizard, the Horserosian wizard, what was his name? Yes, he had a sorry, Akhenaton. Yes, exactly. He had an Egyptian name, where he meets Vanth Dreddstar for the first time. And this series, they will become the sole survivors of the Milky Way, which Akhenaton destroys. And what he sees is the only way to stop the menace of the all-conquering Zygotian army. After the Dreddstar series, after the Dreddstar series moves to the Marvel graphic novel. Actually, Jim Starlin created two graphic novels, which are collected here in this volume 2, called The Price. It starts with the Eclipse graphic novel, which introduces the man who will become sort of Dreddstar's sidekick in the series, another wizard, Sizigi Darklock, and who and here in this graphic novel he gains mystical powers and becomes he gains the powers that he needs to help Dreddstar take down the forces of the Instrumentality, a sort of evil version of the Catholic Church that has taken over the Empirical Galaxy, and a neighboring galaxy to which Dreddstar escapes after surviving the destruction of the Milky Way. You can see here Syzygy Darklock does not have half his face. And the story eventually merges with the second part of the Price, which is the Dreddstar graphic novel that was published by Marvel. Dreddstar was trying to escape his fate as a cosmic warrior, but he can't. Here it is. This is his first meeting with Syzygy, and Dreddstar is very, very angry here, but he can't escape. The rest of the universe is at war, and the war eventually comes to him, and that opens the door for his story to start in his own title, Dreddstar, which was the first epic comic that was published in 1982. Now, Jim Starlin wanted to publish a different title. He had talked to Sergio Aragones because the artist that came from Mad Magazine was interested in producing his own title, but he was convinced convinced by his partner, Mark Evanier, that Marvel would never let him retain the title. So instead, he went to Pacific Comics. So Dreddstar became the first title, and the ongoing storyline began here on part one. Now, I hope you can see this because while the painted artwork does translate okay with the black and white printing process that slave labor used, the flat colors from the ongoing series have a hard time being reproduced. The artwork is very, very dark. As you can see, there's not enough contrast for the stories to appear. But this sort of became a fan favorite, although we did not light up the world as Shooter wanted. There were not enough stories. There was not enough sales for the series to light up the charts. These were the first 6 issues of Dreddstar, and Slave Labor published another 6. This is here on Wednesday. These reprint the first 12 issues. They are also available on a full color reproduction, I believe, by Dynamic Forces, oversized, and it's that will be a much better buy in case you're interested in purchasing these volumes. The thing is, Starlin stayed with the title even well beyond these first 12 issues. He even moved to First Comics with issue number 26, and Starlin continued with his story until number 40, after which he gave up the title. And those stories have not been reprinted, so you'd have to hunt down the individual comics to have the complete story. I first became aware of Epic Comics with the Brazilian editions, and it was precisely the Starlin that made me want to buy it. This is Epic Marvel, the first of 6 issues that were published before the magazine was canceled, and they want to have a rotating cast. Dreddstar was the main feature. They managed to print the first 6 stories in all the 6 issues, and here they introduced as the backup story Sisterhood of Steel, which is sort of a sword and sorcery, I guess, title, featuring Amazons. It was done by Christy Marks, written by Christy Marks, with art by Mike Boasberg. Quite interesting, actually. This ended up being more attractive than the Dreddstar story because I was already knowledgeable with Starlin, so I knew what to expect from him. This was sort of a cross between Red Sonja and Wonder Woman. Issue number 2 introduced Alien Legion, and the plan was for Alien Legion and Sisterhood of Steel to switch places. Now, Alien Legion was the concept was very simple. It was devised by Karl Potts, who did not write or draw any single story. The first stories were done by check this volume 2. The first stories were done, I believe, by Elliot Brown. No, it doesn't. No, the concept was the French Foreign Legion in outer space. So lots of spaceships, but this was not Star Trek or Star Wars. It was supposed to be a lot more hardcore, more reality, more consequences, more people getting killed. And it featured some interesting designs. Like the main character here was the human-like Tori Montrock. He was supposed to be the reader's character, but he was definitely not the most interesting, since he was a career military with the rank of lieutenant, so he was starting out. He was a rookie, and the snake-like Sarigar, who was a more interesting leader. He was the leader of the Alien Legion, this Alien Legion squad called Force Nomad. But the character that everybody ended up loving, this one. This is Jugger Grimrod, and he was their Wolverine, the loose cannon. Now, it's very interesting that the Brazilian publisher chose these titles because they were not the first ones to be published by Epic after Dreddstar. The plan was to have a comic by Frank Miller, but it was not published by Marvel. It was published by DC. Here it is. It's Ronin. Had been an Epic comic, but it was not. Not that it was not successful. It very much was, and it probably would have done better for at Marvel. It would have saved Epic right off the bat. They would have had a better an early success, which they ended up not having. The other title was supposed to have been Star Slammers. Now, Star Slammers, which I have here with the IDW Collected Edition. I also own the original graphic novel. And I love this because this is Walter Simonson, is one of my favorite writers and artists. But I think he only wanted to get this out of his system. Now, Star Slammers began as a college project. It ended up becoming his college major. A series of episodes were published on his university paper. They're here in black and white. But what ended up being published at Marvel was only the graphic novel, which did not have an epic logo. He was definitely trying to go for a heavy metal vibe here. As you can see here, this is typical Simonson, but it's also different from what he would end up doing at Marvel with Thor. This ended up not becoming an epic title. There were no further adventures for another decade. The next Star Slammer story was published by Malibu Comics. It was supposed to have been a 5-issue series, but the creator-owned imprint was shut down when only 4 issues had been published, and the 5th one was published as a special by Dark Horse. They're all available here on this collected edition. Instead, what Epic did was poach a series from Eclipse Comics. The second Epic story was Coyote by Steve Englehart and Steve Lealoa. The series at Eclipse was actually had art by Marshall Rogers. And this became the second title, and in 1983 there was a a few other series that year. Starlin, who had by the time given the both Epic Illustrated and the imprint to Archie Goodwin, wanted to have more. And after Coyote, the first one was Alien Legion, which I already showed. But I also managed to get my hands on their Epic trade paperback. Here it is. This is a strange collection because it features number 1 and then jumps through several issues and goes straight to number 7. I believe. Yes, it is. Alan Zonetz and Frank Scirocco. Yes. Yes, it moves straight to number 7 through 11. These stories are being reprinted. These stories are being reprinted by another publisher, but I kind of missed them. They started with the volume 2, which was written by Chuck Dixon, instead of started with volume 1, and so they're probably a bit out of order. But if you can, you should pick them up. These are very interesting war stories in a science fiction scenario, and the characters go through a lot. They challenge their perceptions of morality, and they end up doing things that they would normally be ashamed of, but they still stay together even when they have the sometimes duplicitous and amoral Jugger Grimrod trying to do his own thing instead of paying attention to the needs of the team. Here is Jugger Grimrod. Here it is, with the green face. He became the main star of the series, even though I always thought that Sarigar was a much more interesting character. The Alien Legion was allowed Epic to have a collection of titles, but it took a while until they. It didn't take that much longer until they had more titles. So Coyote was launched in 1983. Alien Legion reached the newsstands in 1984, and after that there was a series of new miniseries, beginning with Doug Moench and Paul Galassy's Six from Sirius, which I own, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't bring it here. It's a very interesting science fiction piece, sort of a cross between the old style that was famous during the 60s and 70s, with the psychedelic tones and the disco outfits, but they were already looking at the more bleak perspective that the 1980s brought with stuff like Alien or Blade Runner. So Moench with Galassi is always a good catch. Epic launched 2 miniseries of 4 issues each. I think they've been collected recently in a single volume, and you should also give those a try. After Six from Sirius, Epic launched Crash Ryan, which is sort of a pulp hero by Ron Harris. I haven't read it. The design looks interesting enough. And after that, it was a more creepy series. This was 1984. 1984, and it was probably not a bit out of place. It would have been better 10 years before. And it sort of features time travel and spirits and some really trippy art by Tom Yates. The story was written by Steve Perry, and there are a lot of references to Jimi Hendrix. It was followed by Sisterhood of Steel, which I already showed you, and Starstruck, which is a very interesting mix of fantasy and science fiction. I also own the collected edition. I think it has all the original tales, not only the ones that were published by Marvel, but a few others. Great artwork by Mike Kaluta. The series was written by Elaine Lee. And I was always interested in finding out what it was about, so I bought it, but I haven't had the time to read it. Drew the Wanderer finally began in 1984. Starlin was kind of angry at Aragones for some of the things he had said when the first issue was launched. But well, we're under the bridge now, I guess. Swords of the Swashbucklers, a pirate series in outer space, was the first one launched in 1985, followed by the Chris Claremont and John Bolton miniseries Black Dragon. I don't own that one, but a friend of mine does, the Dark Horse edition. And by that time, they had a steady stream of titles. They even started reprinting stories that were published that came from other publishers. And even in 1985, they launched ElfQuest in color, the first time that series by Wendy Pini was available in color. And they kind of had to restructure those issues. The original comic had 30 pages of story, and Marvel needed to have house heads, so all of them were redone in 22 pages, requiring the occasional extra page as fill-in to connect the dots between the ending of one story and the other. So they managed to put out the original 20-issue series as a series of 32 color comics. Now there was a problem here. At this time, Epic already been going on for 3 years, and they had not had a hit. And Jim Galton and the publisher Mike Hobson, they wanted to see the publisher succeed. They wanted the imprint to start bringing in the money. And Jim Shooter did the unthinkable, and he demanded that Archie Goodwin put out a series called Elektra Assassin. That took a while, but it finally came out in 1986. And they finally managed to get something out of Frank Miller for Epic, even if they had to use a regular Marvel character to do it. It was not the first time that Epic had to rely on Marvel characters to have a sales hit. This one became it. The Electro Lives miniseries, another one. Eventually, they would have to resort to publishing a Wolverine graphic novel called Meltdown. But it was not your typical Wolverine story. It had a painted artwork by John J. Muth, and it was strange. The story was good. It was by Louis Simonson, but Muth had a style that was not good for superheroes. And so these were the early years of Epic Comics, and well, I would love to say that they were a big success. They managed to stay in print until 1994 and stay in business. They still published a few Akira books in 1985, but Epic would eventually disappear. But I think this is something that people need to remember. It was Vertigo before DC had Vertigo. It was a creator-friendly imprint before there was Dark Horse, before there was Image, before there was Vertigo, and it had a much higher reach than publishers like First Comics or Eclipse. So there was a lot of interesting stories that were published by Marvel under the Epic imprint, and it's a shame that they kind of lost their relevance. So I wanted to showcase them here and make sure that people had the choice to take a look at them again. Like I said, Dreddstar, a few of the stories are available in reprints. Alien Legion is available in reprints. Starstruck. Also, Coyote is available in reprints, although you will have to hunt them down a bit. They were kind of old, and unfortunately, Sisterhood of Steel is not available. I think Christy Marks still prints new. She still does new printings, and you can buy her the comic directly from her, but there's no collection. So this was the beginning. I'll come back later and do a finishing study. Suppose that I can find my copies of martial law, and there were a few other instances of that were kind of interesting, like Marvel trying to create a new universe inside Epic, and people like Howard Chaykin creating their own stories. And you know what Chaykin is like? He has a tendency to write himself in the stories, but they are always entertaining. So if you're a collector of old comics, I hope you've gotten hungry for Epic. We will probably return to this theme in another video. But next week I'll probably see what I can do different and try to showcase another little bit of comic book history. So until then, I'm signing off. Keep reading old comics. And bye bye.